Take a moment to imagine. You have been born in a black and white room, and your entire life you have lived inside this black and white box. Your eyes can still perceive and understand color, but no matter what, everything will be seen to you as black and white. No matter if the object is the most vibrant shade you'd ever see, to you it is still some tone of black, white, or something in between. You've gone your life eating colorless food, watching the world go by through a black and white television. You spend your days studying color, studying neurophysiology, collecting every piece of information possible on the subject. You know every interaction, every issue, and the science down to the most precise interaction. You know that, when someone says blue, it stimulates the receptors tuned to 490 nanometers or some variation in of. But one day you awake in a cold sweat, and for the first time in your life you can truly see what years of neurophysiological study actually means. You experience color for the first time. At this moment, do you gain anything? To me, the answer is yes. This is a modified version of the Mary's Room thought experiment, put forward by philosopher S.E. Jackson to disprove the idea of physicalism in philosophy, and while Jackson has rescinded his opinions on the Mary's Room argument, it still preserves an interesting beginning to understand and discuss the idea of what qualia and experiences, which serves as the basis for my work, exploring how photography can be used to share experiences in instances that would not be as easy to share through verbal speech. As an individual with autism, this is important to me in my practice. It ultimately forms the backbone of my artistic practice and the language I use when I approach my work. It is commonly defined that qualia are single subjective experiences. They are things that debatably exist within the psyche. However, as a term I think it's incredibly important to explore the ways in which they've made an impact on the work that I produce. Understanding the qualities in which philosophers use to explain qualia helps greatly to understand how this has come to pass. Daniel Dennett's the main philosopher I draw these notations on. In his original writings on the topic, Qualia and Qualia, he states that qualia are supposed to be properties of a subject's mental states that are 1. Ineffable, 2. Intrinsic, 3. Private, and 4. Directly or immediately apprehensible in consciousness. And through this, I shape a lot of my inspirations with the work and how it's been produced. Then its four definitions colour heavily the way in which I understood and approached qualia through the work itself. Understanding these four categories has helped me understand both the limitations at a microscopic and macroscopic level, helping me apply that thematically to my art form through photography, and how that can be used to share experiences with mental disorders like autism, helping create a new method of working with this overarching concept. Defining Dennett's designations, these are ineffability, the idea that qualia are fundamentally unable to be communicated or apprehended by others. Experiences are subjective. Intrinsicality, they are non-relational to other experiences. Their proximity or overlap will not affect that qualia. Privacy, qualia are private. They cannot be perceived the same way by two different individuals, therefore they are private. Immediacy, lastly, they are direct. There is only one chance of having a qualia, and it happens immediately without thought. In making my work, it's important to understand that these four ideas shaped a lot of the initial shooting and how I understood the way that I was going to make my work. It helped me narrow down what I wanted to achieve, and that was to create images that were easy to digest and had an immediate point of interest. They also helped set the expectation that I may work candidly, however, they had to be easily consumable. Thinking more in depth on the idea of qualia and how I go about executing a piece of work was important, as it is possible to argue that every piece of work ever made is an exploration and an attempt at violating these properties of qualia as laid out by Dennett. Art is a way in which we share certain qualities. We share lessons, experiences, and ideas through it. These are subjective experiences to a degree, and therefore this is an attempt at sharing it in a controlled space. One scholar, Dewey, writes that the work becomes an experience for a human being. When it is observed and considered, it serves as a vessel in which we execute and understand an experience, suggesting that both artwork itself is an active vessel of the way in which we process art. It shares these messages and concepts in a way that attempts to violate the qualities of qualia subconsciously. Art is an underlying way in which humanity attempts to share these experiences, from original cave paintings hunting deer to the bulk of the modern-day surrealist movement. Art is always, to a degree, emotive. It shares experiences and emotions no matter what, though it is not always successful in that. Art has the inherent need to share the way the artist sees the world, or how they want to portray that. It is the closest we can get as a species of a way to describe our own qualia, as a medium built on visuals where we have complete control of smaller realities so long as there is the right materials. This idea of visual language is important. My own work is a visual language in which I am claiming and building to create ways of sharing my own qualia with the world, and making my own experiences known. We can make art represent anything and everything, and so I am choosing to demonstrate my own experiences of that as an individual with autistic spectrum disorder. Autistic spectrum disorder, otherwise known as ASD, is a form of social disorder, categorized largely by differences in social, communication, and cognitive abilities. And this language is not to suggest an individual with ASD is any more impaired than what we would consider someone neurologically typical, or a neurotypical, or a neurotype, but rather they exhibit symptoms of difference that may present challenges to them or their development. Autism is, for the most part, a medical mystery, and while most common understanding of its cause being attributed to genetics by institutes like the Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, its history is watery, with its roots in autistic schizophrenics and its classification from Canada's classical autism and Asperger's to being wrapped into autistic spectrum disorder in the DSM-5 and later the ICD-11 in 2013, both of which are medical journals to deal with psychological disorders like ASD. Within the world of art, however, there are a lot of representations of autism that only acknowledge the more jarring forms of autism. As one could imagine, there is little room for what some would consider more subversive expectations of autism, with focus being on individuals with symptoms similar to low-functioning autism, not only due to the way those with ASD tend to behave for the idea of protection, but scholars like Lester would argue that the ways in which most popular representations of autism impose neurotypical formulae or conventions on people with autism labels, ignoring social differences through the validation of the neurotypical experience, which opens up a new line of questioning into making the work and understanding how autistic individuals present their perspective and experiences and how they may be self-imposed. One of the biggest techniques of self-preservation for autists, after all, is the idea of masking their symptoms from the wider world. It's one of the most common traits used in the autistic world, however, is the trait of masking. Masking is a series of behaviors that those with ASD or other similar disorders engage in, which is the active spectatorship of environments and acting to specific notes that line up with neurotypical behaviors. Be it as subtle as forcing eye contact or paying extra attention to hidden cues that require extra inference to pick up on that otherwise wouldn't be acknowledged, it serves as a method of social self-defense, and for many environments where judgment or outright hostility could occur, it is not uncommon to incorporate a tactic into daily life as it helps bridge the gap of communication that's one of the core issues. Hiding what are considered more extreme behaviors which fall outside the social expectations. Pearson argues that a pathologized status comes with the experience of stigma, dehumanization, and marginalization, and masking is ultimately one of the direct responses to this collective experience. It is not uncommon for people to be treated differently when you make known the fact you have this pathologized status, and such you see major changes in the way that you are perceived and how you perceive the world and kind. Masking serves, as debatably unhealthy as it is, to be a way in which individuals with ASD can make steps to reclaim their humanism and dissuade stigma. Even if it is toxic to the self, it is tiring and uncomfortable at times, living every moment as a performative act, under the attribution of the neurotypical validation that Lester writes about. Socially, there is the expectation to conforming into that regulation that requires the idea of masking to be conducted. Bringing this back artistically, it forms the second half of my work, and how it's influenced the work I've produced. A lot of this revolves around the ideas of observation. Masking requires an intense level of hypervigilance that puts you paying attention 100% of the time, which ultimately is how I took my work. Drawing back on previous mentions of themes, I produced the work candidly, as it was artistically the best way I could represent this. It was the idea in which I used to represent my own worldview by carefully picking out scenarios with colours and moments that left lasting impressions. It was the translation of social observation, seeing how people act and responding in kind, to a purely observational role. When people do not look at you and they ignore you, you're just another face in the crowd, but you see details of everyone else in kind. It becomes a sort of moment where you can see things that others wouldn't notice no matter what. My practice takes these moments and captures them forever as a way of showing how I focus and see things, of keeping previously built ideas like the layout and design balances that need to have layers of organization. Looking fully into my practice, I've looked to blend the ideas of quality, the textual research, reading, and contemplation that's made me explore the ideas of how we interpret, express, and share our own experiences, and how important that is for both myself and others within the neurodivergent community to make our voices, perspectives, and experiences heard, with the ideas thematically around masking and how we interact with the ways we act and the semi-universal behaviors, using this as a way of fine-tune the way that I want to try and share my own experiences. I appreciate the fact that sharing them directly is a categorical impossibility, as I want to interpret the colours and motions the same way others would. However, it is a way of which I am making use of a visual language to demonstrate experiences in a more accurate fashion. I have more control over what I'm sharing, and therefore I've been able to fine-tune it to pair alongside how I remember that experience. Helping synthesize these two ideas together has come to create both the way that I've shown and the way that they've been presented and produced. The big issue was shooting candidly. If my work was staged, it would have undermined the entire idea of the project. Such, I chose to shoot in the middle of the streets. These are transient spaces which has its benefits. In making use of the transient space environment like streets, no one pays attention to you. There's a layer of anonymity that's afforded to you when you're able to get away with observing the unusual displays people engage in when no one is looking at you. The social expectation is that that you will not observe, and in exchange people will not observe you. This project, like ASD, goes to subvert and circumvent this, focusing on details that would otherwise go unseen, engaging with facial expressions, ways of working, background details, and color choices. It requires a keen eye to really be spotted and show that it's not always the main focus of the work is what is important, which ties into the hypervigilance that comes with masking, building this to create a visual space where these experiences and instances can be shared. This is where the idea of quality influences my work. In both the shape and layout, I've deliberately chosen these works to be 30 by 30 by 30 centimeters, small and easily digest in one space as ways of sharing experiences others wouldn't think of. Using the eye carefully curated while working architecturally in my photography, it serves in a way which I as an artist break down the world and interact with humans in social settings. Drawing inspiration, it's hard to comment if finding artists who've done similar work was a challenge. In my own opinion, all work is similar to my own in a way that it is sharing experiences and curating that, in a way that can be shared amongst different people. All artists, for the most part, intentionally or otherwise, embed their own quality into their work, and likewise there are plenty of projects to draw inspiration from. The larger ones I found inspiration from was the work of Erin Lefevre, whose work Liam's World inspired me not only to think too much about the environments I shoot what felt natural to me, but embracing the candid nature of what my work was. Her work is not from the same perspective, however, its inclusion and exploration is one of the most tasteful pieces of neurotypical engagement with autism that I've seen from artists. The level of control exhibited in the work is it almost feels like a collective piece between her and her brother, and throughout the process of making the body of work, I found myself referring to it multiple times artistically and thematically. It's a very succinct exploration of experiences that quality of autistic people from an exterior perspective. Despite it not attempting to do that as such, I found myself looking at the words of Matthew Wong. While artistically there is little similarity between my own work and his body of work, I found myself looking at the emotive and surrealistic expectations of his pieces, and using that as a way of creatively pushing myself along in my work, thinking about how I interact and work on multiple levels to produce the body of work. These two artists have stood out in helping me develop my creative practices, as they've influenced both the ways I've considered and the ways I've produced and exhibited, pushing me to achieve my own vision through their influences. Alongside these artists, I found inspirations in artists like Alexandra Heron, Joe James, and Nadia Sherman, who are all autistic artists with their own stories and ways of producing work that feels correct to them. They have inspired me to produce work that feels correct to myself.